The more corrupted by the signal tower one becomes, the more monstrous, twisted, and durable they become, with the last stop on the road being absorbed into the mass of flesh that dwells within the Escher-like structure within the signal tower. Those that live in the Pale City are trapped by the pull of the signal tower's transmission to varying degrees, and their obsession with its message ranges from mild to obsessive, to the point that most are driven insane while others flee or even kill themselves. And so, looking at the signal tower, it appears that within the Pale City there are three types of people that are affected by its transmission. There are dissidents, people in the Pale City who, through virtue of seeing the damage that the signal was doing, decided to go against it by fleeing while they still could, perhaps to the wilderness, perhaps even to the maw, or maybe death was the only option for them. And of course there are the viewers in their multitudes, who wander the Pale City, obsessed with the transmission. They appear to do anything they can to bask in the glow of its static and mesmerizing sounds. The more they watch, the more twisted they become until they are taken. And it's important to note, through observation, that the transmission's effects on the viewers seem to grow over time. Some viewers still seem to carry on with a semblance of normal life between viewing sessions, while others become so enthralled to the point of chasing their high, sometimes even resulting in death. We can see that many of the viewers still inhabit their apartments, perhaps taking baths, cleaning their house, listening to music, smoking cigarettes, drinking, eating, but this all seems to centre around the fact that tucked away in the corner of their living rooms is, of course, a television set that they just increasingly can't keep their eyes off. And then we have the assimilated viewers who, through their obsession with the television sets, are eventually taken by the fleshy entity that lives within the signal tower and absorbed into its massive frame. And the general disrepair throughout the Pale City, the loose clothing laying everywhere, these in part hint towards people being taken, raptured, assimilated, whatever you want to call it. And this general idea ties in with the theme of the video, that being that the viewers are taken head first. The head, the brain, the mind, seems to be deeply connected to the tower, and we'll discuss that more as this theory video goes on. For now, I would like to discuss something that crossed my mind while I was replaying the hospital chapter of Little Nightmares 2. And what could perhaps be a possibility is not that the patients are there against their own will, but that they are in fact there seeking the help from the doctor. Even in a world as twisted and dark as that of Little Nightmares, there is some hint of normalcy, just that it's been turned on its head. The beings, monsters, and entities that inhabit the world seem to play out their role in a way that, while nefarious, still falls in line with what they are mimicking, if you want to use that word. They appear to have a degree of autonomy, at least. So then, the doctor. Given his profession, it makes sense that these patients, most likely viewers prior to their admission to the hospital, began to see the changes that the transmission was inflicting upon their psyche and physical well-being, and maybe decided to try and save themselves. Of course, the other end of that is that the patients are there for some kind of twisted vanity, perhaps being influenced by the transmission. And I'm sure that's probably the most common theory, or in fact it's even presented as so in the game, at least you would think that way, but just for fun and for a different take on things, I'm going to run with this theory for now and just dissect it, discuss it, and maybe we'll come up with something new. So the first point I'd like to discuss is the fact that the viewers we see throughout the Pale City have distorted appearances, mainly in the face area, twisted skin, concave skulls. And if you look around at the patients within the hospital, then it would come as no surprise that all of them have some kind of changes made to their face and head. It could be something as simple as bandages wrapped around an intact human head, or there's just downright horrific changes to these patients, prosthetic faces, or headlessness entirely. And at one point I did spot a patient with nothing more attached to their neck than a giant set of sharp teeth. And of course there also exist patients with partial or fully prosthetic limbs, and judging by this fact and the wandering hostile living hands, it appears that the transmission takes over every part of a person's body to varying degrees, and those too far gone remove more and more of themselves, even going as far as to remove their own head and brain, in the hopes of ridding themselves of the control of the transmission. And I know it may seem somewhat silly that By removing your head or brain, you would free yourself of the sway of the transmission. But as we can see from the hospital, there are living flesh hands. In other words, a general consensus that the transmission's sway over patients and viewers gets harder to eradicate as it spreads throughout their body. And that does well to explain the varying degrees of surgery that we can see throughout the patients in the hospital. Now then, you may ask yourself why exactly the doctor would be helping those affected by the transmission. Well, first I think we have to rid ourselves of the assumption that everyone in this world, specifically the monsters, beings and what have you, are even working with each other, at least as a joint collective. From everything we've seen of the Little Nightmares universe, it's clear that there are various entities within it. So the Flesh Walls monster or entity that lives within the Signal Tower doesn't necessarily have to be the controlling entity within the entire Little Nightmares universe, simply on account of the fact that it has the Pale City in its grip. If anything, it appears that wherever these entities are in this world, they wish to shape their particular area or locale to their will. So, given that the Doctor is a perfectionist and cares about his work deeply, the seemingly steady supply of patients would be no doubt satisfying to his needs. It's clear then that the operations that the Doctor does carry out work somewhat on account of the obvious walking torsos and limbless horrors strewn throughout the hospital, and the signs of some functionality throughout, such as used toilets, foodstuffs, and even little glimmers of humanity shown by the patients at rare times. The only constant in all of the patients is a fully intact torso. Why this is all that is needed for life to prevail is so far a mystery. Perhaps the body lives, but the actual consciousness of the patient is snuffed out, at least in the cases of those patients without heads. Perhaps those patients that got face surgery or even brain surgery, if that is the case, have managed to retain some of their humanity through their operations at the hands of the Doctor. So if we are to go off the theory that each monster or entity within the Little Nightmares world is not particularly on a hierarchy, but does their own thing in their own area of this world, then perhaps they help each other out from time to time, but no one really assumes a place at the top of the hierarchy. Of course, every Doctor requires some payment in return for their services, and in the case of the Doctor, the promise of a steady supply of patients with a litany of problems is his payment. All of these patients enable him to get ever closer to achieving perfection, and it's my opinion that the Doctor doesn't merely get his would-be patients from those affected by the transmission. There are other means by which he acquires new cases. That then brings us to the teacher and her role in fostering mindlessness within this world. The children, or the bullies as they are known, are no exception when it comes to being controlled and used for the purposes of an entity. And as you are no doubt aware, the teacher surrounds herself by mindless students. If you manage to best a few of these bullies while surviving the school, you'll notice straight away that their heads crack open, revealing nothing but a hollow porcelain shell. I speculate that their bodies are in fact physical and fleshy, like a normal human being, but that whatever process that made them fit for purpose to the teacher required their heads and brains to be tampered with and possibly removed. So then, how does this connect to the Doctor? Well, if we look back at the children's area in the hospital, you'll notice a brain scan among many others. Perhaps the initial plan was to cut and remove certain parts of the kids' brains, but that went wrong, and only a full removal of the head would suffice. As I mentioned earlier, all of the patients seem to require at least a functioning torso or body, so this lines up. So then, for all their mindlessness, the bullies show full obedience to the teacher, acting up outside of class, but being A-grade students when in her presence, unless that involves capturing Mono, in which case she appears fine with that. In short, the Doctor works on children, moulding them into the perfect student for the teacher, and in return she provides the Doctor more opportunity for perfecting his craft and new people to work on. And in this case, a seemingly successful one. Well, as successful as psychopathic killer children could be. On a side note, if we look around at the storage rooms and classroom displays in the school, they're littered with organs, real organs. I think it's clear that as part of their little deal, the Doctor also provides any leftovers from his experiments with the patients to the teacher so that she can teach her twisted lessons. So we've discussed headlessness, mindlessness and control, and there appears to be no hope left in the world of Little Nightmares. But perhaps there is a glimmer, at least as far as the transmission and its control is concerned. I'd like to quickly touch upon what I have dubbed the hopeful patient, someone we see while trying to escape the doctor in the hospital chapter, and who clearly holds a place of significance in the doctor's heart. This patient, who Mono eventually kills by turning off their life support, was perhaps the closest that the doctor had ever come to curing, if you will, the transmission's effects in a patient. You can see that this hopeful patient has a quarters all to themselves, tucked away from the chaos above. And the most important thing to take from this is that the patient is able to move around while bathed in light, hinting at possibly being free of the transmission's control, given that the light does not affect them like it would every other patient we've seen until now. And on the topic of light and its effects on the patients, I speculate that due to the crippling control that the tower inflicts upon its viewers and patients, light itself somehow reminds them and their bodies of the mesmerizing glow of the televisions, and the response to it is a kind of deer in the headlights reaction. One last point regarding the effects of light. The patients are shown to be incredibly hostile to Mono whenever they are in darkness. Why I think this is because of Mono's obvious connection to the televisions and to the signal tower itself. Their lives have been so affected by the transmission that knowing Mono is a conduit of sorts sends them into a rage to seek and destroy that which put them in this hellish place. Likewise, the viewers, content with their consumption of the transmission, only ever seem to mess with Mono if he interrupts their viewing sessions. So perhaps then what we've seen with the hopeful patient does indeed hint at a kind of hope for those lost to the tower. But this is Little Nightmares. There's a whole world out there filled with horrors and entities who see humans as toys and experiments available for their own games. The patients and viewers and children may escape the transmission and its control, but for them and everyone in the Pale City and beyond, new horrors wait just around the corner.